Welcome to the Euro Step Brit podcast.
Game's going to be decided here. Harold spots up, doesn't go, put back is good! Roberto Canada with a second chance opportunity. Aris lead. Per Gunter for three, got it! Per Gunter, 3 punta. Courage inside, for Gordon for the dunk! Ball game!
Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Euro Step Brit podcast. We'll call this one Reading Between the Lines. I'm going to explain more in a bit. I just wanted to start this episode by basically offering an apology. I'm really sorry there's been no episodes since I think the 7th of October was the last time I released one, the Mike Taylor interview, which by the way is one of my most listened to episodes. When I started doing this, I thought I'd have a lot more time to be able to interview people, sit down, edit and publish episodes. At the time, work was really quiet, but in the last couple of months, work has really taken off. Not only am I doing my usual European basketball commentaries, you might have seen I'm back doing the occasional SLB game, which is great because I really missed commentating games in what was the BBL. And I'm also working a lot in football behind the scenes these days. And, you know, when you're self-employed, you take work wherever you can. But I didn't imagine I'd go over a month between episodes. So a couple of weeks ago, what I thought I'd do is, when the international window came around, I was going to try and record as many interviews as possible and then obviously sit down, edit them, stitch them together and release the episodes. And that's what I've been doing this week, recording as many episodes as possible. I'm surprised my voice is still holding up. I haven't been well recently, but I've just done a massive block booking of interviews, and I really hope you're going to like I've got 3 episodes in the bag now, the next 3 at least, for their variety, because it'll talk over a lot of different topics in the world of basketball. And one of the things I've noticed during the last 6 weeks since I last did an episode is people are still listening to the podcast, which is great. And not just in the UK, getting listeners all over the world, especially in Germany and the USA. And I think from the Germany point of view, it's probably to do with the episodes we did with Mike Taylor and Vince McCauley. Anyhow, apology out of the way. Let's get on to this episode. In this episode, we're speaking with Matt Johnson, who is the CEO of the Reading Rockets. And I just wanted to get a little NBL perspective on things. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the NBL teams playing in the SLB Cup, which I think is a great addition. And I'm loving the fact that the NBL and Scottish teams will all be playing their games at home. So potentially some tough trips for SLB teams. And we also talk about player pathways, which Matt is very passionate about. And the topic which originated the idea for doing this podcast with Matt, we look at players who've played in the NBL and then gone on to play in Europe. And without further ado, let's get to it. Matt, welcome to the podcast. Busy weekend for you. You played Hemel in the league at the weekend. You just came up short against them. But now you've earned yourself a place in the Kick King final after you beat Derby on Sunday.
Yeah, thank you, Niall. Thank you for having me on. And great, really, really good weekend. And hard to say that when you lose a game, isn't it? But Hemel's roster, I think, may be one of the best rosters I've seen, and they've got pieces to come back. I think they could compete with a number of SLB teams this year. With the Darian Nelson-Henry's a bit of a cheat code, as popular people around British basketball will know. So him, and they've just got some really good pieces, and they've got Mark Clark coaching, and they've just got a really good setup. So we were down quite a long way, came back, had a shot to tie it, just came out, so we didn't have enough legs. And then to go into the Sunday game and beat again a really good Derby team who are always really good. They were without without a couple of their guys, and so they were a bit leggy, and it was just made for a brilliant game. And we were just thrilled to get to another final. It's You can't win them if you're not in them, you know. Crikey, I didn't realise it was a rhyme. Anyway, but yeah, really good, really positive weekend for the men's teams. Yeah, absolutely.
And in the kicking final, you're going to face MK, who you lost to in the National Cup final last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, and what a story they are as a club. I mean, terrific for British and English basketball. With Peter Taylor, who's masterminded everything, and the young guys with Josh Merrington and Billy that he's got there. I think it's just a really, really good story. And we'll go to it. In fact, we play them this weekend in the league away. So great atmosphere, and they were the first and only Division Two team to win the National Cup. So they beat us in not a great game for us to remember, of course, but yeah, we go back to play them probably sometime in March, I think. But yeah, it'd be really good. We're just thrilled to get on the board with another final.
And speaking in terms of cups, of course, you guys are in the SLB Cup this year, along with a number of other National League teams and teams from Scotland as well.
Yeah, and that's a real privilege for us, and uh, openly grateful to the SLB for re reigniting that for us because that went away under the previous generation. So it was a little something, a little treat for the fans, and we would always get some big crowds and really helped us as the league below. Always tough when you're playing with two imports against teams with four, five, or six, and the depth of talent that they all have, of course. But a challenge that we still love, and our players love, and our fans love. So, and to increase on that, to get a home draw for all the Division One or the Scottish teams, was a real a nod of gratitude from us to them as well. So, yeah, I hope it marks the start of the leagues, perhaps supporting each other, being more connected. Player movement's an interesting one for those leagues as well. Historically, hasn't been great, but there's a few guys starting to go in and do some really good stuff there. So yeah, it's really positive that SLB and NBL1 journey. So yeah, great to be in that, and looking forward to hosting Sheffield.
Yeah, a very good team under Tiba Lions.
Yeah,
It's going to be a challenge for you. But there's some great ties in there. You mentioned obviously Hemel, how good they are. Of course, they got Manchester Basketball. I mean, Falkirk Fury going to take on the Leicester Riders. London Lions have to go away up to Paisley, take on St Mirren. Derby are playing Surrey. There's a potential upset there. Obviously, you mentioned yourselves against the Sharks. Nottingham against Cheshire. Essex are taking on Bristol. And then the only all SLB tie is Newcastle versus Caledonian Gladiators. But from
yeah,
my personal point of view, I just love the fact there's more teams in the competition. And as we've seen in previous years, I mean, I can remember Solent a while back doing really, really well. I can
yeah,
remember Thames Valley Cavaliers almost beating the Surrey Scorchers, as it were, then
yeah,
in
yeah,
the competition as well. And Solent also giving Surrey a bit of a nightmare. And I remember going back even years, I can remember when Bristol Flyers were National League, they beat Surrey United, which
yeah,
time was a huge upset. So it's
yeah,
it's a great to have this cross league, isn't it? Having these teams
yeah.
coming in.
Yeah, and Derby as well. Derby had a good run as well. That they beat a couple of teams.
I think they
So
beat Surrey. Yeah, they beat Surrey, didn't they?
yeah, so it's good, and I think it's good for a basketball culture. It's just good for NBL1, and I think it's good for SLB as well because traditionally the flow of players hasn't been great. But when you get those mixed competitions, players in our division have something to show, right? They've got some status that if you want to play in the pro top league in our country, this is a great opportunity for you to show why you should be there, or at least being recognised. So why not? I think nothing other than positive things come out of it. More stories for the media, more clips, more British people in seeing our game and celebrating it and understanding it more. Everyone knows that it's not just the Premier League of football. They all know there's several divisions. So to try and just tell that story a little bit more, I can only see it being positive.
And it brings us round to the main topic that I wanted to speak to you today.
Just how important is the National League now as a destination players? Not just players coming from the States, but also young players getting their first steps in the game. The National League is improving, and it as a destination for players, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's a really hot topic at the moment. I don't really know why it's coming up. I think sort of social media always brings stories with it, uncertain timeframes in their own world. But I think when we try to look at the question of what's good for British talent, and I try and answer that with great infrastructure, great coaching, longevity, and good competition, and do all that in a supported environment. That's basically what you'll see all over Europe. And that is one thing we should be emulating, not just a player's team for a certain year. Players learn over years and many years. So the NBL has a big part to play in that because it's starting to be the top end. And we've seen traditionally the Barking Abbeys have competed with a predominantly junior program, a roster of players. We've certainly been. We always have 3 to 4 that will be on our either on our roster or on our bench, and about 4 to 6 will train with our senior men's team. And when they're ready, we'll come through either our second men's team or our academy at EABL or under 18 Premier League, whatever it might be. So it's become a really important destination for British guys as well that don't want to be at the lower end of an SLB bench with all the travelling and the pro and the midweeks and have other jobs. So it's become a very important destination for a lot of different players for many different stories. And I think that's the beauty of it. Hence the 2 import rule allows more British guys to be important on rosters. And you'll see that now across every team. Every team doing well in the top 8, 9, 10 of Division 1 is got a core of a mix of British and American talent that are putting together some really good basketball. So yeah, it's a very important destination, and a very important home for many players. As a lot of them have been in their teams domestically for a number of years now, which shows that they're being looked after. So that's a really good statement for me.
Would you say there's more loyalty than the National League players do tend to hang around a team longer than say they would in the SLB, where there's a lot of turnover?
Yeah, I think, and part of that is because of other factors as well, families, jobs, work. Most a number will be pro guys in NBL 1, but there's also a number then that have got mixed sort of dual career players where they have 2 or 3 days a week with something and 2 or 3 days a week when they're playing basketball. So there's the loyalty. I think loyalty goes both ways. Clubs have to be loyal to the players if the players are doing the right thing, and they should be loyal to that player's career, not stay here no matter what. And I think that's where the balance comes. The player is there to make sure the team's getting better and they can compete in that league for the money or the position available. And the club is doing as well as it can to provide great infrastructure with its strength and conditioning, physios, good coaching, scouting, film, a semi-pro to pro environment. So yeah, I think it's both things, that kind of loyalty and stability.
I did an episode with Vince in this series, and we were talking about players who'd played in the National League and then gone into Europe. And obviously, Troy Cracknell, who left to go, I think he played in Iceland or somewhere, then obviously went to Germany. Taylor Johnson, even though he had a brief spell with Plymouth in what was a BBL, of course, his career was made in the National League. And I just figured for this podcast, the reason I got you on was if for people who might not know the National League, if you've got examples of players who've made a name for themselves in this league and then gone on to play elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, it's great, isn't it? I mean, I guess my favourite one would be the Luke Nelson story, because he's probably the most well known. And I guess he started at Worthing when he was about 4 or something, like with his dad Steve, that was a national team player and great coach, and in fact played at the same university at me at Borough Road, or what is West London, or now Brunel, or whichever one it is. It depends how old you are. So Luke was a really good example of that, and actually had options to go to Europe earlier, and he chose to stay, do his A levels, go the collegiate route, and had a very successful career in Europe, culminating in coming back in terms of our fans for the great London Lions team, and captained that team through some injuries and had a really, really important time. But you mentioned Troy, and I think a number of Americans that will be overlooked by immediate pro teams on mainland Europe, should we say, and even SLB or BBL as it would have been back then, getting opportunity to come in, get some cultural calm and some peace in their life, and then play at the level that they think they can, and then get opportunities where either their agents are doing a really good job with them, like with Troy getting a job in Iceland to start yourself off, going to mainland, then I think Azerbaijan and then Germany. I think that's great. I think that those things are really important. And you mentioned Taylor. I mean, Taylor was a pest in Division One for many a year, and nearly got Thames Valley to some games that perhaps they wouldn't have really had the right to get to. And then obviously his time at Hemel was very successful. So people like him going on doing. And my question was, could he have gone earlier? Maybe, but SLB teams were looking for different things. So it's quite an interesting perspective. And well, Aaron Rye's another one from Hemel that's moved into the BBL as it was and had lots of offers in a lot of good leagues in Europe. So there's definitely now a better flow, and I think it's kind of broken that ceiling a little bit. There's certainly a few cracks in there where SLB teams will look for our division and perhaps now give them more of an opportunity than they would have done before.
National League teams getting scouted more by SLB or European scouts and agents?
Yeah, I think I've had more conversations with agents more recently. I think that agents on use the word on a smaller scale. So not for them necessarily to make a lot of income from players, but to try and get players into good environments so they can blossom. Germany is a really good example of that. So for Taylor and for Troy, the agent wouldn't have been in there making loads of money off them, but would have been able to get them into a good competition league. If they do well, you've got a real entrance into mainland teams, and either move up in that country where contextually it's easier to understand the value of the player on and off the court, and all the other things that go along with that. So I think it's really interesting now. Agents are normally the ones that start. They start this off, and we've certainly had a lot with local agencies trying to say, yes, I think this player could do well in this division. I think that's shone by Troy, Taylor, Luke, back in the day, Usman Krabali, I think we mentioned, and Krabali was really good in our division when he was at Barking Abbey here, was a fantastic player, and he went on to do some really good stuff in Europe as well.
Yeah, so for those listening who don't know, obviously he won the FIBA Europe Cup with the Chemnitz last season. That's a good competition. It's a European-wide competition. And a big shout out to John Hobbs. I've got to give John Hobbs a shout out. He's helped some way. My research today. And then another one John mentioned to me, Alfredo Ott. You remember him? Went to play in Spain. It's about 20 years ago, I think.
Alfredo Ott from Worthing Thunder, I think they would have still been back then. Really talented import player, and was certainly being looked at by the BBL guys at the time. I remember that, and went on to Spain. And another great example of countries with many ladders of teams where players go in there and understanding the value of starting at a slightly smaller team, and for agents doing a really good job with players like that. And he was super talented, had a long career in Spain. I think he stayed there predominantly most of his career. So yeah, some really good news stories for those guys.
And one more you mentioned when we chatted about this a few weeks ago, possibly doing this, was O'Showen Williams.
Yeah. I mean, O'Showen's a really good example of a player completely overlooked, Division One from from Appalachian State, in a smaller conference, and at 5'10", 5'9", was never picked up to be a pro. And he came in the last year of COVID, came to Reading, and we happened to have a spot, and a phone call from someone who knows us and knows him said he'll fit really well. And he did terrifically well. And then another agent managed to get him a spot on a German team, and he went out and just lit it up and did really well. And he's moved his way up and down those top 2 tiers in Germany to find his place. And he's now got great income, which is great for his family, and the people that love and care for him will want to see him do really successfully. So without a lot of people with some really clear knowledge of what those leagues need and what we needed, and the character of the player and what they can offer, there's probably a lot more talent still, maybe not realised at the moment, I would guess. But yeah, O'Showen has certainly proved a very good example for 5'9", 5'10", playing at one of the highest leagues in Germany, and 6,000 people watching him play, and media attention, and all the things that players crave traditionally from the USA media machine.
Obviously, we've concentrated on the Rockets because obviously you're with the Rockets. The fact you've had these success stories in the past, does that actually help you with recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, probably more than I give it credit, because we tend to work in the moment and we tend to say this is what we're looking for now. But most players they'll know your history. They'll know whether your coaches and your coaching is good enough to help them, and that's something we've always prided ourselves on. The way that we coach the guys is, and it shouldn't ever be understated, because it's a very difficult job, especially to play in a way which we think is important, where players could go into Europe and feel comfortable in the general systems. So a lot of the systems that we play, you'd be familiar with if you're watching European basketball, and that's been a really important part of our basketball culture. That we know we're not the end destination for most people. You are part of the journey, so you do have a responsibility to do things that players can continue with them and take on, rather than just worry about your moment or your one moment with them. So yes, it's probably a bigger recruitment tool than I thought it was. And now obviously with games on YouTube and film, players and agents would do their research. Well, it's this coach and these guys are staying, so this is what you're going to do, this is what your role will look like, and we think you can transition to a higher league through here. So yeah, pinpointing those guys and being allowed to say these players have done that similar road to you, I think is, yeah, very, very important for us, actually.
I mean, you're a club that prides itself on its junior setup. You start the kids young, you try to get them through all the age groups. How important is it for you to clubs to have that setup, all the pathway, all the way from juniors to senior?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the most important thing that people don't talk about enough. And we're talking about the route, the pathway of European players and the pathway into and out of. And it's as interesting to look at how do players stay with your club. And that's one of I first went to Cherbourg and they said, oh, we're a small club here. We only have 20 teams. And I scratched my head going, only got 20 teams? I think there's about 5 of us in the whole of Britain that have 20 teams in a club. But it does make sense, because if you have one boys team from under 10s and 2 male teams and 1 girls team from under 10s and all the way through 11s, 12s, 13s, it's 50s, 60s, 18s, second team, first team, you will have to have 20 teams for players in your area to just have an opportunity to play. That doesn't include second teams or third teams or central venue league teams or community teams. So I think we're a long way away from realizing the importance. We start them I think my wife runs a community program at 4 years old, which is get a ball, low hoop, chuck it in, music playing, have a great time, fall in love with just running around with your mates and doing aeroplanes on the floor, right? Right the way through to kids at 6, 7, 8 who can now play 3-on-3 easily and enjoy the game, right the way through into ones that just, you don't have to be any good. You can go to a community session and just enjoy playing. Who cares if you're good or not? Just enjoy the opportunity you've got, because those are the people that are going to be your supporters. They're going to be around. The culture of the game is not about the 10 that are playing, it's everybody else. That's your culture. The 10 that are playing is the culture of your team. There's different things. The culture of the sport and your club needs to be enriched by the amount of joy that everyone gets from being a part of that, no matter what your playing level is. And I think we've probably been led up the garden path a bit by people chasing dreams of the NBA and everyone saying it's all about that. It's not. It's about every other country. Those things happen, but they happen because of a great infrastructure. And I would just encourage every team and every club to look at, are you really servicing the needs and wants of your community by only having 3 teams of the very best kids in your city? I think we realized that a long time ago, so we're not. So we've got about 22 teams, wheelchair teams, men's, women's, boys, girls. They're not all great. They don't all win everything. They don't all lose everything. No one enjoys it all the time or hates it all the time. That's part of being sport. But we've got another 800 kids underneath that just have this experience of community basketball every week, once a week, because they do 4 other sports. Great. 4 times a week because it's what they love. Great. So I think that's where our biggest learning from European counterparts should be coming. So for me, anything that echoes that, performance comes from a love of participation. That's all it is. And if we can generate that participation where everyone has loads of access to, why can't every club have 2,000 kids playing every week? I certainly don't know. You hear about Newcastle and the stories of them, and now Milton Keynes and ourselves and Solon, and I could name you probably 5 others. But we need more of that. We need many, many, many more times that to get the right volume of kids to really build that loving culture of the game. So, yeah, I'm glad you asked me.
And just one final question before we go. Have you got links with clubs in Europe, or would you love to have links with clubs in Europe, maybe help with development?
Yeah, we work quite closely with Valencia. They're probably the 3rd best club in Spain right now at the moment, pouring in investment. I understand that, but it's not that we're interested in. It's more the cultural underneath that. So I visited Estudiantes, where Dan Clark famously went at 14 years old, and they had 42 teams playing, and everyone thinks it's amazing. But they were playing in really old sports halls and everything, and it made me understand that you don't need to have a venue, a building with 20 courts in it like Valencia have now got. That comes later down. That becomes a necessity. But it's a great question because it depends what question you're asking. The question I was asking ourselves was, how do we get 2,000 kids playing a week? And then what does that look like? Well, you need to use all the sports halls in Reading for us. So we are using as many as we can possibly find. So there's a lot of people out there. And every time I've asked a question, every single club that I've gone to has been really open and forthcoming. They all love the game. They just want the game to grow. So I would encourage it. But I think the first thing is to look internally at what is it you're trying to do, because it creates the questions you need to ask these bigger, successful clubs. I can go to Lithuania tomorrow and ask Žalgiris, but they've already got, I don't know, 2 million people playing within a small amount, and it's a lifeblood of basketball because of what it means for their independence. So it's a very different question I'm asking. Whereas, here in Reading, it's how do we make the love of the game filter into primary school kids so they really want to play and they want to come and watch and they want to celebrate, they want to watch the men, the women, and create local heroes. So, yeah, it's a brilliant question, and one I think there's a bit of warning on it is check what you're asking, because otherwise you copycat something that's had 25 years of embedding when you've got 5 minutes. So I think there's research to be done, but in my experience, if you're asking the right questions, you're going to get some fantastic input from those clubs.
Brilliant, Matt. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really do appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, Niall, for having me.
And finally, if you're enjoying what we do, please make sure to like, subscribe, or even share the pod on your social media. Every little bit of support helps. Until next time, my name's Niall Gray. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Euro Step Brit podcast, a hoops and hockey production.